Foreword to Spring Has Sprung by Azlan M.A. Why you need to read this story. Every now and then, a piece of writing comes along that jolts us out of our comfort zones and demands to be heard, not because it is sensational, but because it is truthful in a way few stories dare to be. Spring Has Sprung is one such story. Billed as fiction, but resonating unmistakably as lived experience, this is a visceral account of trauma, misunderstanding, and survival within the rigid institutions of Western psychiatry. Told with brutal honesty, sardonic wit, and a refusal to sanitize the past, the story invites readers into a world that is disorienting, sometimes surreal, and profoundly human. While presented as a short story, Spring Has Sprung occupies a liminal space between memoir and narrative fiction. Its autobiographical underpinnings, evident in tone, detail, and emotional intensity, grant it a raw, testimonial quality. The result is a compelling hybrid of lived truth and narrative craft. Told in a direct, first-person voice, the narrative alternates between clinical clarity and emotional chaos. The juxtaposition of the narrator's architectural education with his psychological disintegration is striking. His voice moves between the analytical and the hallucinatory with unsettling ease. This tonal instability mirrors the mental fragmentation being depicted and becomes a literary strength. Structurally, the piece eschews traditional arcs in favor of a fragmented chronology. Memories, rather than plot, dictate its form. In this way, the story captures the jagged texture of trauma, where time bends and distorts. Themes of medical negligence, miscommunication, and the cultural alienation of a young Malaysian student in late 1970s Britain come to the fore. Yet, the story never lapses into victimhood. Instead, it is an act of witness, quietly subversive and unapologetically raw. The prose is simple, even rough-edged at times, but this contributes to the story's stark realism. Its power lies not in polish, but in presence. If you've ever questioned the power imbalance between doctor and patient, or wondered how cultural misunderstandings can spiral into clinical tragedy, this story will resonate. And if you've never thought about those things, then you must read this story. Spring Has Sprung. A work of autobiographical fiction inspired by a bunch of idiots who call themselves psychiatrists. It was late March 1979. The drab winter with its gray skies was dragging on in London and spring was nowhere in sight. I was a 20-year-old university student in my first year of studies. One evening, I had a cold, or more technically, as I learnt later, a post-nasal infection, and I went to the university clinic, but they were closed for the day. It being Easter vacation, my regular doctor, Dr. Sedgwick, was on leave. I had to phone for the doctor on call, who came to my room in the hall of residence at about 10 p.m. to examine me. The doctor spent a total of, say, 2 minutes giving me a cursory look over with his stethoscope and thermometer. Yes, he was a man in a hurry indeed, with many more calls to make that cold winter night. He gave me some antibiotics to take and said, "Take 3 tablets a day and don't drink. Give this note to your regular doctor in the morning," and left in a flash. Now, I was studying building technology, and the subject I was covering just before the Easter break was known as daylighting, which has implications for fenestration and such like. For us builders and architects, a day means 12 hours, and night is another 12 hours. For laymen, a day of 24 hours is our day and a night. So you can guess what happened. I overdosed on the antibiotics, taking twice the amount necessary, a tablet every 4 hours instead of every 8. There was one other communications failure. He said, "Don't drink." Being a teetotaler, it simply didn't occur to me that he meant don't drink alcohol. I just thought he meant don't take fluids while I was on the medication, which meant I was soon dehydrated as well as overdosed on the antibiotics. The next morning, some friends drove me to another doctor's clinic. He was Dr. Hunt, covering for Dr. Sedgwick in the latter's absence. He wasn't based at the university clinic, but at his own surgery, some distance away from campus. He took the note from the doctor on call, read it, and gave me some medication. He did not even examine me or talk to me. The note stated a diagnosis, post-nasal infection, and had a prescription. Apparently, the doctor on call hadn't had the correct antibiotic and had given something similar to cover me in the interim. So Dr. Hunt gave me another antibiotic, also to be taken 3 times a day. But as you know, I still didn't realize it was meant to be a 24-hour day. So that night, or the night after, I can't remember exactly, the memories are all a blur, I was sleeping and had a vivid nightmare. I also had pyrexia from the post-nasal infection and was delirious. The nightmare was very frightening. It had to do with my friends at university and the occult. The devil, evil, flames, chanting, night, darkness, ritual sacrifices, blood. I woke up with a start in a pool of sweat. It was 4:30 a.m. I was confused and in a state of fear. I needed help. I ran to the door of the subwarden's room at my hall of residence and knocked. He was a black man, a Negro. He opened the door with a peeved expression on his face. He was naked and covered himself with a blanket. In his bed was a blonde white woman, naked under a duvet. It was obvious he was in the midst of screwing her. The image of a black man screwing a white woman somehow associated with my nightmare. More evil. In my confused state, I associated him with the devil, perhaps because the color black was associated with evil. He said, "Let me get dressed. Wait for me at security." Yes, security, I thought. I should be safe there. I ran as fast as I could to security. I arrived in a state panting breathlessly. The guards asked me what was wrong, but by then I was incoherent. Confused ramblings poured forth from my mouth. I managed to write down my name and room number. They dialed for an ambulance. They thought I was high on drugs. It was not uncommon in the late 70s for students in the UK to get high on LSD. In the meantime, the subwarden arrived, but I was terrified of him. Seeing that, the guards put him in a wrestling hold and interrogated him. He gave them the name of a mutual friend of ours, Miss Yim, who happened to be his coursemate. The guards phoned for her, and she arrived just as the ambulance came, so she accompanied me in the ambulance to the emergency room of Hillingdon Hospital. There, they took off all my clothes and examined my body closely for puncture marks, as evidence of drug taking. They took urine and blood samples, and then, without a word, everyone disappeared. I was alone, naked under a blanket, on an operating table. Bright lights glared at me from above. I was worried. What are they going to do to me? I asked myself. Then in came 2 figures. They both wore thick spectacles, surgical masks, and were dressed in green operating gowns. One was tall and thin, the other short and fat. The short, fat one did all the talking, but it was obvious the tall, thin one was in charge. He asked me to sit up and gave me a thick, brown, sickly sweet syrup to drink. I later learned it was chlorpromazine. "Are you a good Muslim?" he asked in a thick Greek accent. I didn't know how to answer. What if I said yes, and he hated Muslims? Was he going to kill me? As my fear mounted, I decided to hedge my bets. I recited the names of as many prophets as I could. Adam, Mohammed, Jesus, Abraham, Solomon, David, Joseph. I even threw in Confucius and Buddha. The short, fat one said, "Oh, shut up." He gave me an injection, more chlorpromazine in my right outer thigh. I twitched from the needle. "Be still or else I'll shoot another one up your arse as well," he snapped. Then they both disappeared. The ambulance drove me, still naked, to Windsor Ward. Miss Yim was nowhere to be found. At the reception, I covered my privates with my hands and asked the receptionist, "Can I have my clothes back, please?" "I dunno, love. You'll have to ask your doctor." "Who's your doctor?" she replied. "I dunno," I said. Then a short, fat man in a 3-piece suit, red necktie, and waistcloth came by. He wore thick spectacles and barked, "What are you doing here, walking around starkers like that?" "Get him to his room," he ordered the orderlies. "If I can just have my clothes back, I'll find my way home." I began to say, but he wasn't listening. I recognized his voice. It was the short, fat doctor from earlier. His name was Dr. Kalkavarus. He was a psychiatrist, not the kind of man with whom you could get a word in edgewise. When I reached my room, I passed out. When I woke up 3 days later, I had 2 pairs of bedroom slippers, 3 toothbrushes, and some bars of soap. Friends had left them, but I was in a state of oblivion. The chlorpromazine had knocked me out. I couldn't move a muscle. I could barely lift my head, let alone speak. I couldn't even focus my eyes. I lay there, paralyzed and comatose for 2 weeks. Even my peristalsis stopped. I didn't shit for a fortnight. The psychiatrists couldn't find any drugs in me, so by elimination, they diagnosed a mental disorder. Acute schizophreniform psychosis. They'd noted a high ESR, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, of 37, indicating infection, but dismissed it. If they'd only asked me, or rather if I'd been in a state to tell them, they would have known about the post-nasal infection and antibiotic overdose. Ironically, the overdose had cleared the infection so well that by the time I was admitted, there was no trace of it. When friends visited, I was reminded of the nightmare that had featured them. This distressed me, so staff banned them from visiting. I was put on 250 milligrams of chlorpromazine and 10 milligrams of haloperidol 4 times a day, plus procyclidine to counteract the side effects. I was heavily sedated and completely alone. I could think. I could listen. But that was about all I could do. I was a zombie for the next few months until I slowly developed a tolerance and regained my psychomotor skills. I gained 60 pounds in 6 months, mostly due to lack of activity. I later learned that the tall, thin doctor was Dr. Stanley Weisberg, FRCP Psych, the consultant psychiatrist. Dr. Kalkavavarus was under his supervision and eager to impress. After leaving Hillingdon Hospital in October 1979, I spent the next 10 years being weaned off the medications, shuffled between drugs to mitigate the side effects of other drugs. Those 10 years were, in my view, pure nonsense. I didn't have a mental illness. Misunderstood, certainly, but never crazy. Don nota bene. If you are reading this, Jane Sherwood and Dr. Tara Collinge, please get in touch with me. You have both been paragons of empathy. By Azlan Adnan, M.A.,